Today, I'm going to talk about 3 bicycle construction concepts that, in my humble opinion, shouldn't continue in the next generations of mountain bikes, of cross-country. I know I'm going to give some rather harsh opinions, and of course, you have every right to leave your comment down below, whether you agree with me or not. But I'd like to make an important disclaimer first. And that's that any of the opinions or constructive criticism I'm going to give are not directed at any specific brand, but rather to comment on the concept of construction or the trend that has developed in recent years within cross-country and mountain biking. That being said, I'll get straight to the point. The first one I'm going to start with has to do with the exclusivity of manufacturing bikes for cross-country at 120 millimeters, disregarding the 100 or 110 millimeters altogether. Anyway, in all these years, I don't know, it's been about 3 years since the new Scott Spark came out. It was the forerunner. It was the first brand to launch this concept of having only a 120 millimeter bike in the catalog for cross-country. Of course, after that came Goss, Mondrakel, Orbea, and many other international brands. We even just saw the launch of the new Canon Scalpel, also reduced to a 120 millimeter version. Anyway, me? All these new bikes that have come out on the market, we have to agree on one thing. They are better than the previous generation. Overall, there's no doubt about this. They are better bikes than the previous generation, which had been designed for 100 millimeters. Now, there are 2 points where this new generation of 120S has definitely continued to fall short. Firstly, it's related to their weight. These bikes are typically heavier. That's normal. We can have more travel, stiffer frames, more reinforcement and so on, wider wheels, bigger tires without having an increase in weight. But well, that's one aspect where they lose compared to the previous generation. And the other one? I can assure you that all these new bikes I've tested lose the battle against the previous model. In tight corners, in very slow turns, in what we call ratoneo, very twisty routes, which on the other hand is just common sense. If you increase the wheelbase, the suspension travel and so on, you also increase the reach because you adjust the geometry. So in the end, these are bikes that go really fast in a straight line, absorbing all kinds of obstacles, but they struggle a lot more in tight, twisty sections. That being said, well, I think there are many types of riders within cross-country. I don't believe the argument most brands make when only selling the 120 model, claiming that's not the reason. World Cup courses are becoming increasingly technical, catering to the top 100 professionals. But what about the rest of us average skiers? Maybe we're not going to get into a World Cup course. No, the way I see it, if we look at it from a business perspective, it's an opportunity for brands to invest in the development of a single product, a single frame, and therefore reduce costs as much as possible and increase profits. I think that's what's really behind these kinds of strategies from the brands. Now, there are other brands that have noticed that within the sector there are different audiences and that it's still possible to go for shorter routes. We have, for example, the option from Trek, which has settled on a middle ground, trying to design the super caliber concept in terms of geometry, but keeping a 110 millimeter travel in the front and the ISO strut in the back. Trying to make the bike modern, but losing as little as possible in terms of agility in its super caliber. Then we have another one like BH, which has developed the new Lynx race entirely around the 120 millimeter travel. But commercially, they still offer you the possibility to buy it with 100 millimeters of travel. Besides, they have something in the works that they're working on, which they'll probably present to us soon. And then there's Specialized, which for me is the closest approach to this kind of concept, which is to directly create 2 different bikes. We have the Epic World Cup with a suspension system and shorter travel. 110, I think it was 85 millimeters in the rear. I mean, a concept. And then they have the Epic 8, which is between 120 and 130, which is a single pivot. It no longer has brain, and that's a different story. And which you can even see in these first World Cups, how there are riders who choose one bike, another different bike, and they're together in a position either ahead or behind. This is super interesting. In fact, if I had a bike brand and could afford it, that's what I would have done. To create 2 different bikes. But well, Specialized has decided to spend the money developing 2 different bikes. And from here, I applaud this way of doing things, and I would love for future generations of mountain bikes, new brands, to go in this direction. And with that said, let's move on to the second point, which I would like not to appear in future generations of mountain bikes, which has to do with internal cable routing directed through the head tube. I think this is a concept that definitely has its place in the road cycling world and even in the gravel world. I won't deny it. Aesthetically, it's very appealing when the cables are neatly tucked away and go straight through the head tube. But in mountain biking, practicality should be prioritized. It's a world where we push the machines to the limit in harsh weather conditions, where we need to make a lot of changes throughout the year. Components, adjusting pressure, fluid, brakes, changing seat posts, changing cables that run inside there. And it's true that there are brands that have implemented these kinds of systems that have managed to come up with very good solutions, but there are many others that are constantly making mistakes. Now, that don't work well, where the cables make noise, the cables go in under tension, the cables end up getting pinched by the turning of the handlebars inside the head tube. There are too many problems for a category, a discipline like mountain biking, where I think practicality should come first. Besides, no matter how well the system is designed, in terms of maintenance hours, let's say, in maintenance costs and so on, we're always going to end up paying more. Compared to a simpler system like having the cables enter through the side of the head tube, something much more traditional. In my case, I have two bikes, each with a different system. And it's very clear to me that the next time I buy one, I'm going to try to prioritize, if the market allows me, the cable entry through the side of the head tube. In this sense, I think that, for example, Trek with the new Super Caliber that was launched last summer was brave and kept it. They didn't get carried away, let's say, by the trend and kept the cable entry on the side of the head tube. And I think mountain biking has to go that way. It needs to stop with the complications. In other worlds, like road cycling, for example, how many times do you change or adjust a handlebar or a stem on a road bike? Very few times. Once you have the bike set up, it's the same thing. It's 5 years without touching it, so I don't know. I think it's something that doesn't really add much beyond photos and aesthetics. And finally, and this point is important to me because until recently I used to see it differently, but my opinion has changed entirely. It has to do with the issue of handlebar lock to prevent the bar, let's say, the handlebar from hitting the top tube of the frame with the brake and shifter levers and possibly damaging them. I've changed my mind because on one hand, I've seen how this system works. Among the first bikes I saw were the Canyon Exceed and the Canyon Lux. With that locking system that was on the outside, which looked awful aesthetically and in many cases didn't work very well, but it was like the original seed of what was to come. Well, I've seen it from the very beginning, and on the other hand, I've also suffered from scratches on the top tube. I recall a Costa Blanca race with my Canon del Scalpel where I fell after my front wheel slipped out. Huge scratch. Carbon and paint contamination is unpleasant. And therefore, every time more integrated solutions for this handlebar lock have appeared on the market, already built into the headset, they've seemed interesting to me. When the latest Trek Super Caliber was released without it, I criticized the omission and considered it a negative aspect. A bike of that caliber should already be on par with the rest of its competitors and have that lock on the handlebar. Well, my opinion has changed in the last few months, and once again, I advocate for practicality. Some brands are effectively utilizing that system, while others are struggling to do so. But in general, on one hand, it's making the whole issue of head tubes more complicated, which also now have to deal with the cables. Through the middle, in most cases. On the other hand, it's adding weight. If we want to reduce the weight of these 120 beasts, we must start removing things. Details that can be solved with other more economical options and that are practically unnoticeable aesthetically. Putting a transparent plastic protector on the top tube of the frame practically doesn't add any weight. It's about 3 grams, it basically has no cost, and aesthetically it doesn't bother at all. I believe we should follow those guidelines. There are various other options such as plastic or rubber impact protectors. I mean, some might be more noticeable and look worse aesthetically. But in the end, I think these are much more practical solutions overall than having to develop an entire locking system inside the handlebar. I don't know, what do you guys think? I go for practicality, for the reduced cost when it comes to implementing things, and so that the bikes can be manageable in a workshop and don't take us hours and hours and hours of extra maintenance. Compared to other models and solutions already on the market, let me know your thoughts on these topics in the comments. What's your opinion? And do you also think there are other trends that have appeared lately that, in your opinion, should disappear? See you in the next videos. Be happy. Bye.